Hi there, my name is Krister Ungerböck, author of the #1 Wall Street Journal bestseller, 22 Talk Shifts, and former global tech CEO. Join us on the show where we're going to talk about how stoicism may be ruining your leadership, what Fortune 500 leaders can learn from family business and long-haired ponytail guys, woo-woo ponytail guys, and why you should cry at work. Stay tuned.
Congratulations! You are tuned into Dov Baron's Leadership and Loyalty Show, the #1 podcast for Fortune 500 executives and those who are dedicated to creating a quantum leap in leadership. Your host, Dov Baron. He's an executive mentor to leaders like you, a contributing writer for Entrepreneur Magazine, CEO World, and he's been featured on CNN, Fox, CBS, and many other notable sites. Dov Baron is an international business speaker who was named by Inc. magazine as one of the top 100 leadership speakers to hire. Now, over to Dov Baron.
Welcome, dear friends, fans, and fellow aficionados of leadership excellence. Thank you for joining us on this episode of Leadership and Loyalty Tips for Executives. Let me ask you, what do you need to do to up-level your leadership? How about upgrading your language in such a way that you create massive human connection and bonding? But there again, maybe you think, my language is good. Okay, could it get better? Try this. Who on your team would show up for you in an emergency, not because you're the boss, but because they're deeply connected to you because of the way you connect to them? Stay tuned, because that's where we're going on today's show. We're going to look at that. We're going to look at how it impacts business. We're going to look at how it impacts your family. And we're going to look at your journey. I'm your host, Dov Baron, and I'm here to assist you tapping into the one thing in your business that changes everything by transforming meaning into action. Curious to know more? Go to dovbaron.com, DOVBARON.com. This episode of Leadership and Loyalty is brought to you in part by our other podcast, Curiosity Bites. Curiosity Bites is the answer to the question, how do we bring people together who completely disagree? This is exactly what your mind, your heart, your soul have been absolutely craving. It's your chance to sit in on some real and oftentimes intense conversations with some of the world's most interesting people. We're talking about quantum physicists, astronauts, neuroscientists, philosophers, neurosurgeons, holy people, skeptics, entrepreneurs, Grammy award-winning entertainers. I mean, it's a plethora of truly fascinating individuals. Simply go to dovbaron.com and find out how you can sign up for and sink your teeth into the delicious Curiosity Bites. As always, you can find both of our podcasts, both the Leadership and Loyalty and Curiosity Bites, on all the usual outlets like Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, or wherever you tune into podcasts. And, we always need your help in staying relevant. So please do us a favor. Go over there, rate, review, and subscribe to the show. If you are a regular listener, big thank you to you for making us the #1 podcast globally for Fortune 500 listeners. And we are honored and grateful to be cited by Inc.com as the #1 podcast to make you a better leader. You can also listen via Google Home or Alexa to simply say, play Dov Baron podcast. Again, thank you for sharing the show with everybody you know. All right, let's strip it down and dive right in. We are living in, quote, woke times where many leaders are absolutely terrified of saying something that could offend. And as crazy making as that can be for any leader, each of us does need to acknowledge that as leaders, our words have power. Power that can create trauma just with what we say and how we say it. So how can we practically upgrade our language in such a way that we create massive human connection and bonding? Well, that's what we're going to find out together. Our guest today is Krister Ungerböck. He is a leadership communication expert, keynote speaker, and former CEO of a global tech company. Prior to exiting the corporate life at the age of 42, Krister was the CEO of one of the world's largest family-owned software companies. Krister has done business in 40 countries, built businesses in 6, and lived in 3. He's done all this while leading a company to over 3,000% growth His team created $100 million in shareholder value, and he won won 5 top workplace awards, achieved remarkable employee engagement at a level of 99.3%. That's pretty amazing, and became a dominant player in the market niche. He is also the author of the brand new Wall Street Journal bestseller, 22 Talk Shifts, Tools to Transform Leadership in Business, in Partnership, and in Life. Ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together and help me welcome Krister Ungerböck.
I almost feel like I need to put my hands together for myself. That was such a great, energetic intro.
Good to have you here, mate. I've been looking forward to this conversation. I loved our original conversation because you and I are kindred spirits in many ways that we'll get into through the show, but we both have this need to shift the way we see leadership at a much deeper, more compassionate level of connecting. So I want to jump into that by asking you this first question, which is, what is the leadership question that we're ignoring that we really should be looking for the answer to?
Well, I think it's really how our words actually land on people. You said we're in this woke culture, but unfortunately, many of us are still asleep or napping or half awake, right? So,
or in a coma.
In a coma. Now, I think that COVID and like what's happened over the last year has made a big difference. You know, I mean, I was talking with my editor. We almost finished the manuscript, but it was actually supposed to be done right before COVID hit. And I'm so thankful that actually we delayed it 2 or 3 months, because I don't think that this book would have been nearly as successful. I mean, a lot of the compassionate and communication that was woven into the book came after COVID hit. And what I found for myself as a leader is, I think this happens both in teams, but also in marriages, is we often think that we need to change people to change our relationships. And what I've discovered is it's really as simple as changing your words. I had the opportunity to learn 2 foreign languages as an adult. And so language has always been very present in my life.
Mm-hmm.
But interestingly, I never actually applied some of the lessons that I learned while learning French and German. I never applied them back to my native language, English, because it's just such a habit, right? So we as leaders and husbands and fathers and mothers and parents and wives, it's important that we just start to get more aware of the language that we're using with others, and also the language that others are using with us. And that's really the key to changing our relationships, both at work and at home.
So the question that needs to be answered is, how is your language impacting? So I want to just come to that for a minute, because as you just said, language is, I think the French is synonyme, under the nose.
Synonym, no.
Under the nose. I probably said it wrong. I'm not pretending my French. Under the nose. So it's this groove under your nose, right? It's under the nose.
Oh, okay.
So language.
Okay.
Sorry?
Yeah, I understand.
Right. It's language is under the nose, meaning it's there. It's obvious to everybody else, but we are quite ignorant of it.
Yeah.
Most people have no awareness. So one of the leadership technique, language communication techniques I teach is, I say, I want you to do a discipline for 1 day, and you're going to need an accountability partner. And they go, okay. And the discipline is this. The discipline is every time you say you when you mean I.
Mm-hmm.
They go, what do you mean? I said, well, you recently, you just said to me, you know how you don't know how I do that. You put your eye on me, right? And they go, oh, wow, I never thought about that. No, it's, again, under your nose. We miss it because it's right under our nose. So let's start with that. How do we get a little more awareness?
Yeah.
Even around the language that is so unconscious.
So I think that like, I love that you started with that, because actually one of the chapters in my next book is specifically about the usage of the word you. And I actually go even further to say, when we use you, especially in a tense conversation, try to get through a conversation without using the word you at all. Like, you did this, you did that. So an interesting, coming back to language, in French and German and many other foreign languages, the word for the reason we in English use the word, when you do this, the translation of way people say it in French and German is second person indefinite or third person indefinite. It's when one does this.
Yeah, one.
And so but we don't say that habitually in English, so we use this you. So it's one of those things that I noticed is that sometimes English actually kind of creates some more communication challenges that don't happen in German, French, and many other world languages.
Yeah, I have the advantage, disadvantage, depending on point of view of being educated in the UK when I was a kid. And I used to say one all the time.
Yeah.
And when I moved to North America, people didn't know what the hell I was talking about.
Yeah.
And I was talking about the collective you,
Yes.
when one, and I had to displace that. I had to get rid of that because people don't understand it. But it is this way of making this separation. And a lot of time, what people don't realize is if you use that language, like, when you can actually create a physical, visceral response inside of that person of
Yes.
feeling attacked.
Absolutely.
Even though you're not attacking them. And you might go, come on, I didn't mean it. And they're like, doesn't matter, it landed. And this is what you're saying about how the words land on a person. So that's powerful.
And that's really the subtle difference. It's interesting being in the UK so close to France. Like, I'm sure that's why it's used more frequently there, is because that, like many people who live in the UK learn French, obviously many French people moving in and out of the country. And so the real difference is, I agree that saying I is better than saying you, or when you do that.
Mm-hmm.
However, what we're saying is when people in general.
Yes.
Maybe I don't do it. Maybe I really am saying people in general. And
Right.
that's what this difference between this indefinite plural, the one, when one does that, or when people do this, or when someone does that. And so it's one of those literally, imagine this. I imagine, because you're using this tool, people use these things all of the time.
Yes.
And so a big part of kind of what I hope to bring to the world with this book was applying some of those things I learned learning foreign languages as an adult. Most people learn languages as children, so it's not a conscious process. You just kind of don't even realize it. But having done that as an adult while opening businesses in Europe and France and Germany, I actually had to learn it from scratch. And again, the crazy thing was I didn't apply those same lessons back to my native language English when I moved back to the United States.
So let's go a little bit further in this, because this book is about language and the language we'll use as leaders and how to be way better at it. But when we look at language in the context of what it actually is psychologically and neurologically, even, language is trained. If you're born in China, you speak Mandarin not because it was a difficult language to speak, but it was modeled and that's what you learned and your brain got wired for that. And if I suddenly plunk you in the UK or in, Johannesburg or, some other country with another language, you're going to, it would be you'd struggle. So the problem with it is the language that is native is actually the most unconscious language. And we don't just learn the language that is native to where we're born. We learn what I call coded language. Mm-hmm. And the coded language is the language of the family. Yes. Right. So the language of my family is, oh, you're an asshole. It might be a compliment. Yes. Right. Like when I was born in the UK, if you called somebody a bastard, that was very insulting. Mm-hmm. Right. It meant you were a child who was born out of marriage. I'm old enough that was the thing. Right. But when I moved to Australia, g'day, you bastard, was like, oh, well, you're a friend.
Yeah.
So there's this context of also the coded language of families, and you were in a family business. Mm-hmm. So you've got this double-sided. So you've got the code of language of your country, you've got the coded language of your family, and then you've got the coded language of a family business. So talk to us a little bit about what you were able to recognize about how that plays out in a family business, because family business is, in case anybody doesn't know, is the largest generator of business in the world. Family business.
Yes.
Not mom and pop shops down the corner, but Johnson & Johnson is a family business. And you start thinking about that level, it's like, holy crap.
Yeah. Walmart is a family business.
Walmart, exactly, right?
Yeah. So I'll add one more additional coding is my father, his native language was German, and German is a very direct language. Yes. So when he was speaking English to me, he was unconsciously using much more direct language when he was speaking English. So that gets into a whole another thing. You know, for me, one of the reasons why I wrote the book, I wanted it to be really a book that people could use to become better parents, both better leaders in the context of business, team, marriage, as well as within a family as a parent. And that was because I was the CEO of a family-owned business. Mm-hmm. My father was essentially my boss. Ultimately, I had I kind of forced him out, ultimately in 2007 when I became CEO. And that created a lot of kind of hangover effect that ultimately resulted in me leaving the company about 7 or 8 years later. But, you know, there was no differentiation from me of being the leader of a family versus leader of a business. And so this is when I set out to write the book. I was like, I always, as a business leader, despite the fact I was in a family business, I thought, well, the language I use with my wife and with my brothers, and it's different. Well, ultimately, after I left, I realized, oh, no, it wasn't. And sometimes the words were different, but the language patterns, when you look behind maybe specific words, the patterns were the same. Yes. The patterns of criticism, of being passive aggressive, just asking questions that in many business books, like a simple one, like the 5 whys, whatever, since Toyota like 50 years ago said, get to the core of the problem. Well, asking the question why simply is a very aggressive question. There are other words like tell me more or interesting, you know, like that can get much more open people up. So I was trying to apply many of these communication tools that I learned from business books in all aspects of my life. And it ultimately resulted in me having a business divorce and a marital divorce spaced out by about like 2 weeks. So my whole life fell apart. And I said, well, I really got to stop reading the business books and try to find out the answer to this question for myself and for hopefully for others.
So let's give people that backstory, you know, that moment.
Yeah.
That brought you to that realization in the context of divorces.
Yes.
So I'd like people to have that story so they really get.
So
I think that life changes on a moment of crisis. And in a moment of crisis, we dig deeper into our shit or we evolve from it. Yeah. So that's why I want you to go there.
So so now 5 years ago, just a little bit over 5 years ago, I had 25 years of conflict with my father. It was going back to when I was 12 years old, and I started reading business books when I was 12. Finally, after 20 years, I mean, we grew the company from, 10 employees to 250 employees. You know, we were well over $100 million in value, possibly even closer to 200. And then about 100 million of that is value I created as CEO. And the conflict behind closed doors, we weren't doing our employees justice. Like we were growing 12, 13% a year, but easily we could have been growing 25, 30%. Wow. But we couldn't make decisions because all we did was argue in kind of the peanut gallery of like, oh, you know, no one was ever giving solutions. They were just saying, why my solutions? We shouldn't do them. So we were basically kind of gridlocked. Yeah. And so after hiring coaches and therapists and, you know, mediators, I finally just went to the family. I said, hey, you know, sell me the controlling interest of the company. I will split the financial gains equally with all the family members. I'll take on all the debt personally, everything. Just name a price, and if I can't come up with the money, whether I need to go to a bank or go to private equity or whatever, if I can't come up with money, then I shouldn't be CEO of this company. I should be, you know. So, and they came back 24 hours later. My father came back and he said, "There is no price at which I would sell you my company." Like not even $1 billion, not even $500 million. What about 4 billion? Just give me a number. I won't even give you a number. And so I said, well, if that's the case, then I'm going to move on. And so I left this wasn't actually just leaving this company. Like my lifetime vision from age 19 was to build $1 billion company in my life. So I literally walked away from my identity at age 42. And then 2 weeks later, my wife walked out on me. And I found myself at the YMCA, signing up for gym membership. And I broke down crying when the woman asked me the question, who's your emergency contact? And I had no one. And I realized that I kind of was looking in the mirror, tears in my eyes, realizing that I saw the leader I become. I was a leader with no followers. And I realized that in the years after that, as CEOs and senior executives in companies, we have a tool to inspire followership that most people don't. We get to set the vision for our organization. And so people followed me. I had some amazing people on my executive team. We would never done what we did without this. But I realized they followed me they didn't follow me. They followed the vision of, I want to be part of building $1 billion company.
Right.
But they didn't follow me. And so the reality is that 99% of the leaders in an organization don't have that tool of creating an inspiring vision. They can only rest upon being someone that people want to follow. And so I realized that ultimately my own demise, my wife as well said, I don't want to follow you. Right? That was as simple as that. And so that was what set me on this thing. I told you in the pre-call that I basically threw out the business books. Hey, I've read 2,000 of those. So I surrounded myself with woo-woo, far-out people I would have judged back when I was a CEO. And I always kept my business hat on. What can I take away from this rather than being the judgmental person that I would have been before? And it was really taking those language tools that I learned in those rooms that many people would be like, whoa, you did what? It was taking and translating those tools into things that could work in business and can work within families. That was really, I think, the kind of the secret sauce.
So obviously you had this moment of breakdown at the Y. And, as I've said many times, there is a moment like I talked about when I fell off the mountain and people go, oh, that must have transformed your life. No, it dug me deeper into my shit for a while, because there is a pivotal moment, which is what that was for me, falling off the mountain, for you standing at the Y and realizing, oh, okay. But then that pivotal moment is catalytic, but it's not change. Change for me, in my opinion, comes in the moment when you can go back to normal, but you choose not to. Mm-hmm. And I've heard the pivotal moment from you, right? There's this, but not the choice point when it's like, yeah, I could go back down that road. I could get back. Did you feel like you could go back down that road, maybe not in your own family business, but in something, but you said, you know what, I have to go hang out with the woo-woos?
Well, I was fortunate to have someone, so I'm in an organization called Young Presidents Organization. I had someone who came from a therapy background who I met about 4 weeks after that. And she was a therapist. She's kind of a coach, facilitator. And she said, hey, look in this direction. And this kind of immediately set me down the path of looking into trauma and how this trauma that I had experienced. And I didn't have any, there was no like abuse in my childhood, like the stuff that most people would think of as trauma. I'm like, what are you saying, that I was traumatized? And she goes, no, you need to like try to understand this. So the other thing that I made the choice in that kind of months follows is I made this conscious choice that, I need to heal from this relationship with my father, my divorce. And I said, I'm not going to work for 6 months, or it ultimately ended up being about 18 months before I really went back to work kind of even half-time. And financially fortunate, I was able to do that. But because what I knew, being a kind of a workaholic my entire life, if I went back and even got a job at McDonald's, I'd probably be working 60 hours a week making the fries, right? So, and what happens is when we work, we're not forced to sit with our emotions and our thoughts. And so I didn't have anything going through my mind to distract me.
Yeah.
And so all I was left with is, what am I thinking about? And I kept coming back to the anger towards my father, towards my former wife. And so I was like, I need to heal this.
Yeah.
And so my journey to language was also a journey through kind of trauma. And I'll mention one other story, which was in the days when I was CEO, and even in the year that followed, I actually really wondered if I was maybe like an alcoholic. I was never like somebody who, drank every day, but I was one of those people on a Friday night, if you saw me at some event, like, if I got more than 3 drinks, maybe I might have 10.
Right.
And so I wondered, but what I realized as I started to heal from the trauma that was created in my life, actually, I don't have a problem like with drinking anymore. I don't drink nearly as frequently as I used to either. But I also don't have this fear that what if I go out and have more than 3 drinks, will I actually end up, drinking 12 or 10 or whatever it may be?
Well, again, you're in an area here that I want to come back to actually in the second part of the show, because people don't understand trauma at all. And by that, I don't mean leaders. I mean, oftentimes psychologists don't even understand trauma. And so I want to talk about the traumatized leader who is leading and creating trauma. And how to develop the language patterns that you've got in 22 Talk Shifts to help them maybe see their own trauma by observing their own language. Because one of the things that's really greatly revealing is if you start paying attention to your own language, you being the person listening, but it's also me or any of us, if we start observing our own language, we suddenly realize that we're actually talking about ourselves. We're talking about our own shit, and we're putting it out there in the world. And as you and I have talked about, it's nothing more than an echo of that horrible voice inside of your head. And as I always say, if somebody's being mean to you, here's one of the ways you can have compassion is remember it's 100 times louder and 100 times more often inside their head to them.
I think that, you talked a little bit about the word bastard and things like that. I think I had this thought experiment. So I was like, if somebody said to Einstein, "You're such an idiot," like maybe he's like an absent-minded, like, smart guy, and he does hair's all messed up. "You're such an idiot." I suspect Einstein wouldn't have been like, "I can't believe you called me an idiot." Like, "You're Einstein." But so these are the things that sometimes we can say words, even in sarcasm or jokes, to others that they actually, because their self-image is, if Einstein said, "You know what, I'm not very smart, I haven't won a Nobel Prize yet," or, so if his self-image is, "I'm not smart," jokingly calling him an idiot would probably take him down. And so a lot of times as leaders, whether we're giving feedback, and this kind of comes to more practical examples, if we give people feedback, we don't know where they come from. And one of the things that I wish I had done more as a leader, I was always leading with, here's what could be done better. I thought, like, well, if it's 99%, my job as the teacher is to tell you the 1% you got wrong. And the reality is that, I mean, that was how my father was with me. So I've learned it from there.
Exactly. Family of origin translates into how you were led in your family is how you lead in your business.
Absolutely. And ultimately I, worked for my father for 15, 20 years. So I kind of experienced it in the workplace as well. So then what I realized is that, I was fortunate that, I had a job right out of college with one of the most prestigious consulting firms. I could look at the financials and be like, hey, I'm doing a good job. But the reality is most employees don't have that external validation that maybe a CEO or a vice president of sales or even a salesperson has. And so they crave and they need that positive feedback more than the negative feedback. Yes. And so for me, the biggest shift in my leadership style was, even when I use this much more with my children, is saying, hey, here's what you did right, and really reinforcing the behavior that I want more of rather than trying to correct the behavior that I want less of.
And that's a great key point to finish up this first part of our fabulous interview with Krister. Krister, would you do us a favor before we go away? Just we're going to come back for part 2, of course, and we're going to dig deeper into all of this, including more about the book and the practicality of how to apply it into your life. Again, it's a Wall Street Journal bestseller. But before we go away and come back for part 2, please tell our audience where they can find out more about you and about the book.
Well, the best way to find out more about me is through the book. You can go to talkshift.com, and we have special offers there to get the book. Of course, you can get it on Amazon as well, but that's where to get it.
Talkshift.com. You can find out about Krister there. You can find out about his books, and of course, we will make sure that we post all the links to his socials so you can find him in the show notes as well. All right, we are at the end of part 1. We look forward to part 2, so stay with us. Remember, we're just one click away for part 2, so stay curious, my friends. Stay curious.